Cruisers and battleships in Axis and Allies have some very cool abilities. In this video, we're going to break down the rules so that you can use these ocean-going monsters to bombard your enemies back to the Stone Age. Let's make it hot. My name is Gary Blevins, this is Board Game Nation, thank you so much for watching. Welcome to part 4 of our 5-part series breaking down sea combat for Axis and Allies. In part 1 we took a detailed look at the rules for submarines and destroyers. Part 2, all about aircraft carriers. Part 3, we did a breakdown of the rules for transports. If you want to take a look at those, we'll have links at the end of this video. Today we're examining the rules for cruisers and battleships. We'll be covering the basic stats for these sea beasts and how you can use their offshore bombardment ability effectively to make a big difference when you try to storm the beaches. In part 5, we'll bring everything from this series together in a video dedicated specifically to amphibious assaults. One quick thing, if you're brand new to Axis and Allies, this video is not for you. You need to head over to our complete how to play video linked in the card above. It'll take you through the game from top to bottom, or you can jump around using the chapter guide in the description. This video series is for folks that are looking for rules clarifications and examples specifically about sea combat. Overall, we'll be focusing on 1942 2nd edition, but thankfully, the rules for sea combat haven't changed that much since the original came out back in 1984. So about 94.6% of the series is going to transfer to other versions of the game. If you like anything having to do with board games, and well, you clicked on this video, so I'm guessing the answer to that question is yes, please support content like this by subscribing to the channel. Thanks. Of the 6 different naval units in Axis and Allies, cruisers and battleships are the most straightforward. Let's start with the cruiser. Cruisers cost 12 IPCs to build, attack and defend on a roll of a 3 or less. Special ability, offshore bombardment. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Battleships cost 20 IPCs to build, attack and defend on a roll of a 4 or less. Their special ability? Battleships can perform offshore bombardments like cruisers, but battleships have the added ability of taking 2 hits to sink. A battleship can absorb a hit and continue the fight. If it's assigned a second hit, then it's destroyed. If it ends combat having only taken a single hit, it will repair at the end of the turn. This repair can happen anywhere on the map and with no IPC cost. While the rules for cruisers have been pretty consistent over the life of the series, the rules for battleships have changed a number of times. Originally, battleships could be sunk with just 1 hit, and in other versions they can repair, but they've got to be next to a naval port. So make sure that you check the rules for battleships in your version of Axis and Allies carefully. Let's take a look at an example that shows how the offshore bombardment ability gets started. This example is going to use a cruiser, but it'd be the same if we were using a battleship. Adding a cruiser for the Germans gives them the ability to use the offshore bombardment ability during the attack on Egypt. The transport loads the infantry in Algeria, moving to 15, loads a tank from Italy, offloads them in Egypt to fight with the other land units, but this time we add the cruiser. Offshore bombardments are basically a free shot that cruisers and battleships get to take before combat begins. Cruisers will score a hit on a 3 and battleships on a 4 as normal, and any hits that are scored are selected by the defense and moved to the casualty zone. But those units will get to shoot back during the defender's fire phase of combat. If you played earlier versions of this game, that last bit was a change in the rules. Let's see how this combat plays out on a battle board. The cruiser hits at a 3, so we placed it in that lane. The cruiser fires first, needing a 3, a hit. The defenders move 1 infantry to the casualty zone. The 2 infantry units need a 1, both miss, and the tanks need a 3 or less, both hit. The UK moves the 2nd infantry and the fighter to the casualty zone. The cruiser can't be hit during the defender fire phase, so we move it back to the map. Both infantry get to fire back, 1 hit. The fighter needing a 4 or less, 1 more hit. The Germans remove 2 infantry. The British remove their casualties. The Germans take control of the territory and adjust the national production chart. A couple of notes. The number of ships that can perform offshore bombardments is limited to the number of land units being offloaded from the same sea zones as the ship doing the firing. So you can't just buy 10 cruisers and drop off 1 guy and fire all the cannons. This also means that the ships can't do offshore bombardments if they aren't dropping any troops off at all. Plus, you can't have the transports dropping troops off in a sea zone and performing an offshore bombardment from a different sea zone. They've got to be moving together. And most importantly, offshore bombardments are impossible if the ship is involved in any sea combat. Let's see what that looks like. In the combat move, the Germans declared a land attack on Egypt with units coming by land and by sea. You can see that Sea Zone 17 has 2 British destroyers. The Germans will have to clear this sea zone before they can land on the beach. They place markers in both areas. The cruiser moves to Sea Zone 17. The transport picks up an infantry in Algeria and moves to Sea Zone 15, picks up a tank and then moves into 17. The infantry in Libya walks over and the tank from Algeria moves in. No matter what happens in the combat in Sea Zone 17 or in the battle in Egypt, the cruiser will not be able to use its offshore bombardment ability because it will have done combat in Sea Zone 17. Let's look at one more example that puts a few of these concepts together, this time in Paris. In this example, we have the UK getting ready to invade France. They have one transport, a battleship, and two cruisers in Sea Zone 15. Sea Zone 14 has a German transport. The UK can attack the transport in 14, or they can ignore it. If they choose to attack it, the cruiser and the battleship won't be able to use their offshore bombardment abilities in the attack on France. If they ignore it, when they land the troops, they can fire away. The UK also has a battleship in Sea Zone 6, but because it can't reach the same sea zone as any of the transports that are offloading, they won't be involved in the attack on France and are free to do combat elsewhere. The UK already has possession of northwestern Europe and plans to attack France over land. This will not affect any of the abilities of any of the ships at sea in any way. So in this case, the UK picks up the infantry and the tank in Libya, moves into Sea Zone 14 with a battleship and one of the cruisers, and ignores the transport. Notice that the UK had 3 ships that could have reached the southern beaches of France and performed an offshore bombardment, but they only dropped off 2 land units. This means that the UK will only be able to fire from 2 of the 3 ships. The other cruiser is not involved in the attack on France. It can be assigned to do combat elsewhere, say attacking the German destroyer in Sea Zone 13, along with the battleship coming in from Sea Zone 6. However, the last cruiser from 15 can't attack the transport in 14. That would drag all the other ships into combat and stop the offshore bombardments. The UK drops the tank and the infantry and meets up with the 2 infantry and the 2 artillery that came in from northwestern Europe. The cruiser and their battleship will both fire once, and the rest of the combat will continue as we described earlier. In Part 5, we'll bring it all together with a complete look at all aspects of an amphibious assault. If you've got questions, let us know in the comments below. If you want to go back to the other parts of this series, click here. When it's ready, Part 5 will be over here. And if you want to watch the complete How to Play for Axis and Allies, here's your link. If you're ready to join Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.